Winona is the mechanic of Don't Starve. She can make one of the few turrets in the game, which makes some of the most productive farms, including Varg farms, spider farms, and even taking on the bosses of the game. Winona also had her new skill tree, which buffs all her structures, including turning her catapults into demolition machines, using nightmare fuel as fuel for her generators, granting infinite energy to her g.e.merator's, and increasing the DPS of her catapults by up to 6.6 times, and unlocking ickle little robots to automate picking up a bunch of items, making Winona's farms more streamlined and automatic, all while mastering teleportation and controlling wormholes. We're going to go through her default abilities first before diving deep into the mechanics and DPS of her new skill tree. Winona is dragged into the constant with 150 health, 150 hunger, and 200 sanity, a standard stat line for most characters. Winona has a bunch of unique structures in her crafting tab, but before we dive into Winona's crafting tab to see all of her structures, she must craft them first. Winona crafts 2 times faster than other characters, but this is not without cost. When Winona crafts something for the first time in 1 minute and her hunger is above 50, she will consume 5 hunger to craft everything faster that she crafts in the next 1 minute. But every time she crafts something within this 1 minute time frame, the timer resets, extending the time of the crafting speed buff back to 1 minute. Though if you only craft one item, Winona will consume hunger to craft it faster, then after 1 minute, and you move 4 tiles away, then you craft another item, Winona will again consume hunger to craft it faster. If the buff isn't active and you do not have the required 50 minimum hunger to pay the crafting speed cost, then Winona crafts incredibly slowly, 2 times slower than normal characters. This ability is useful for mass crafting a bunch of materials like ropes or boards, otherwise try to do all of your crafting at once rather than once every few minutes to reduce the hunger consumed by the ability. Winona starts with Winona's tape. This is an item exclusive to Winona, which she can craft with 1 silk and 3 grass, and it basically acts as a sewing kit, so it can be used to repair various things that a sewing kit can, like thermal stones and clothing, and Winona's tape can also patch holes in boats. This tape can also be used by other survivors to repair things too, but the tape's main use is for Winona's structures. All her structures require tape to craft along with other items, so let's move on to Winona's crafting tab. Winona's generator requires 1 tape, 2 logs, and 2 nitrate to craft. You can then place this structure down. The generator has an area of effect where any structure of Winona's that she puts inside the area of effect will be powered by the generator, and their effects will activate. That means you do indeed need Winona's structures to be connected to a generator for them to operate. Whether the generator is connected to anything or not, it will constantly drain a tiny 2.25 units of power per minute. This generator can specifically only be fueled with nitrate, a mineral you get from mining boulders without any gold veins in them, at least until we get to Winona's skill tree later. 1 nitrate will fuel the generator to 50% of its maximum capacity. When the generator is at maximum capacity using nitrate, it has 180 units of power. Next is Winona's G.E.M.erator. This costs 1 Winona's tape, 2 boards, and 2 electrical doodads. This is a generator which works the exact same as the other generator, except it takes gems as fuel rather than nitrate, and as you'd expect, gems provide a lot more power for Winona's structures, meaning the G.E.M.erator doesn't have to be fueled nearly as often as the generator. The maximum capacity for the G.E.M.erator is 16 times higher than the generator, so the G.E.M.erator can store up to 2,880 units of power, but unlike the generator, it drains 6 units of power per minute rather than the generator's drain of 2.25 per minute. Now for the rest of the guide, when I reference generator power drain, I'll be mostly referring to the G.E.M.erator's power drain, but know that if you're using the generator, then the power drain will be 37.5% of the G.E.M.erator's power drain. What will these 2 generators be powering? Well, using either of the generators, you can power 2 structures. Firstly, Winona's Spotlight. Winona's Spotlight is a structure which costs 1 tape, 2 gold, and 1 firefly to craft. Then, if placed within the area of effect of a generator, its effect activates, which is, when it is nighttime or nighttime begins, the spotlight will turn on and shine a light on top of a player. This light has a diameter of almost 12 wall units or almost 3 tiles across. Winona's Spotlight will drain a tiny 3 units of power per minute while in sleep mode, and 30 units of power from a G.E.M.erator per minute when it is turned on, or 11.25 units from a G.E.M.erator. Although there's a caveat to all the power drains from any generator. Passive structure power drains don't kick in until the structures connected to the generator have a power drain greater than the generator's passive drain itself. Until it reaches that amount of power drain, then the power drain will only be the drain created by the generator itself. Anyway, structures can go into sleep mode. This mode is simply when Winona's structures other other than her generators aren't in use. Then the light on them will flash, indicating it's in sleep mode and drain less power. When the light is a solid color, that means the structure is active and will drain the full amount of power. The spotlight can't shine directly on itself, so getting too close to it will result in the light not following you perfectly. Otherwise, the spotlight will track your movements and stay on top of you in a radius of 6 tiles around it. Once you leave this radius, it will try to track you, but since you're out of range, the light won't land on top of you directly. This means that ultimately it will keep you out of darkness in a 7.5 tile radius around it. This structure is useful for having in your base, as you never need a light source, and it's just enough light to be able to see shadow creatures coming so you can fight them. But you'll probably want something with a bigger radius of light in your base so you can see more during the night. Winona's Catapult is next and is the main event and what we're all here for. Using 1 tape, 3 twigs and 15 rocks, you can craft Winona's Catapult. This structure, when connected to a g.e.merator, drains 3 units of power per minute when in sleep mode and 6 units of power per minute when active. While active, the catapult will automatically target any hostile mob nearby. This includes mobs trying to attack you, any mob that you have attacked, or any mob that lands an attack on you. The catapult will also defend other players along with other catapults. When you first build the catapult, it will be active, but once the catapult hasn't attacked anything for 30 seconds, it will automatically enter sleep mode. While in sleep mode, the catapults need to be manually woken up by interacting with them before they'll begin automatically firing again. The catapults, while active, will fling boulders at any before mentioned hostile mob. The catapult has an unlimited ammunition, so you don't need to load it with rocks or anything, and they deal 42.5 physical damage per shot and fire once every 3.25 seconds on average. This gives one single catapult a DPS of 13.077, or about 9% of Winona's DPS using a dark sword. Each time the catapult flings a boulder, it will drain 4 units of power from a g.e.merator or 1.5 from a generator. If there's multiple generators connected to the catapult, it will split the drain between both generators. This rule is true for all of Winona's structures. The range of the catapult's attack is 15 wall units around it, which is a 3.75 tile radius around the catapult, which you can see when you place the catapult down. The catapults also have a minimum targeting range of 6 wall units, so anything closer than that and outside of the catapult's splash damage range, the catapult will be helpless to defend itself. But the big deal is that the catapult's attack damage has an area effect. It will deal 42.5 damage to everything in a 1.25 wall unit radius of the impact area. In game, this roughly translates to if a catapult strike hits the center of a tile, the area effect will hit about 30% of the area of that tile. These catapults won't deal damage to friendly mobs like merms befriended by a word. They also don't deal damage to walls or gates. Catapults used to damage walls and gates, but not anymore. Due to this change, making farms with Winona's catapults is a lot easier, as you don't need to use any statues to block mobs from getting to your catapults. We mentioned the catapult's DPS is about 9% of Winona with a dark sword, but you can fit a whole lot more than one catapult around a generator. You can use a standard and easy setup method of placing the catapults in a square around a generator by placing them directly above, below, to each side, and on each corner of the g.e.merator with geometric placement to fit 8 catapults around it. Or without geometric placement, you can squeeze 9 catapults around the outer edge of the generator's area effect. With 9 catapults, they'll be dealing 117.7 DPS, which is 80.7% of the DPS of Winona with the dark sword, or 92.3% of Winona with a handbat. Also, the catapults probably won't be getting hit, so don't suffer from hit stun delay like a player would, which would otherwise decrease the DPS of said player. So, Winona with a dark sword and a set of 9 catapults attacking a target will be dealing almost as much damage as a mighty Wolfgang with a dark sword. Neat. Except of course the catapults will be dealing air effect damage, which is pretty game changing for some boss encounters, one of which being Bee Queen, as the grumble bees will get annihilated, and of course for farms since you can kill hordes of small enemies easily. A basic catapult farm is a container for the mobs you want to kill, or a container to keep your catapults safe. This container can be made of walls or statues, then create a bottleneck in your farm to lull all the mobs to 1 or 2 small spaces using something mobs think they can walk through, like a table, where the catapults will obliterate the mobs. We'll discuss my new Varg farm design later in the catapult farm section, along with a few other farms, that way you can fully understand how a catapult farm could be set up. Speaking of protecting the catapults, this is something that you will want to do, as they are still structures so can be destroyed by destructive mobs like Barrage and Deerclops, and they have 400 health, which means your catapults can indeed be attacked by mobs and killed. Though bosses and other mobs will ignore the catapults attacking them as long as they're aggroed on you or another player. If they're not aggroed on you and a catapult hits the boss, they will go and attack the catapult. If your catapults get overrun by a pack of hounds and lose all their health, they will break, returning half the ingredients used to make them, meaning you've got to rebuild them. Although little bits of damage is fine, as the catapults regenerate 8.33 recurring health every 10 seconds, regenerating all 400 of their health in 1 in-game day, which is 8 minutes. That's all to do with catapults for now until we discuss their DPS in the skill tree section later. When Winona is caught in the darkness, she will block the first hit from Charlie. That's because Winona is Charlie's sister. Oh my goodness, no way. Wow. This means she receives no damage nor the extra sanity hit from Charlie's first attempt at attacking her. After she dodges the first attack, she will be vulnerable to any subsequent attack though, and Winona will still lose the big sanity per minute drain while standing in darkness. During the Moonstorm events, Winona will know the correct names for each of Wagstaff's tools, so when he asks for a specific tool, that's the actual tool you should give him. Usually the tools' names are weird and funky, but since Winona was a mechanic that worked at the factory that Wagstaff owned that made the radio that Maxwell used to track Wilson to the constant, she of course knows what the tools are called. Cool! Winona's favourite food is vegetable stinger. This requires an asparagus or a tomato, 1 ice, and then 1.5 additional value of vegetables in a crock pot. This food normally gives you 3 health, 25 hunger, and 33 sanity, but Winona gets the additional 15 hunger from it being her favourite food. So this actually makes it a really good favourite food, since it's a really good sanity food anyway, which now gives a lot more hunger for Winona. So I'd highly recommend keeping this food in your food bundle or polar bear bin for Winona. Now it is time for Winona's skill tree, where we'll discuss how her catapult can achieve 6.6 times the DPS compared to without the skill tree, and how we're gonna unlock teleportation.
Wait, Winona, it's me, Maxwell Gaming, and can you fix my gaming tablet, please?
Oh yeah, sure. What happened to it?
Banjo sat on it.
Oh, I see. I did no such thing. What's up, gamers? It is me, Banjo the Business Pig, and I did not sit on Maxwell's gaming tablet. You see, I got killed by the Rabbit King, and in a fit of gamer rage, I threw the tablet on some wooden flooring, causing it to do the big oof. Huh? Anyway, to fix this, I'm gonna need to know what kind of tablet is Maxwell?
It's Red Magic Nova.
I'm glad you asked. It is the brand new Red Magic Nova gaming tablet. The Red Magic Nova gaming tablet is the first tablet device I've ever owned, and I am very impressed. The 144Hz refresh rate screen is super noticeable, as the screen animations and of course the gameplay are super smooth, even smoother than Banjo's brain. The 10.9-inch screen packs a better than 2K resolution, being 1800 by 2880 pixels, leaving the screen to display super high detail images for whatever you may be watching or playing. And just like the Red Magic 9S Pro, which I use as my main phone now, the Red Magic Nova has RGB lighting, baby! All this packed into a tablet coming in at no more than 530 grams, even I can lift it. Banjo likes the high resolution display to watch his favourite Genshin waifu perform their special abilities. Mr. Scruffles likes the tablet for squashing highly detailed bugs, and Jakey is gonna enjoy using the tablet for creative work. And you can use and enjoy the Red Magic Nova gaming tablet for all those reasons and more. So if you'd like to check out the Red Magic Nova gaming tablet, click my link in the description to get your hands on it, and thanks to Red Magic for sponsoring another video on the channel. Portability is the first of the skills, and it is a simple skill, but has a massive impact. It says, easily dismantle your machines and learn how to build a handy remote to remotely control catapults. This skill fixes one crucial aspect of Winona, which is that her machines are now flat packable and deployable. Now you will find different versions of Winona's structures in your crafting tab, all of which operate exactly the same as before, except when you craft them, they become items in your inventory, which can be deployed on the floor by placing them. Then once you're done with your structure in one location, you can quickly dismantle the structure by right-clicking it to flat pack it, then pick it up and move on with your day. If you wanted to defeat all the bosses with catapults, now you only need one set of catapults rather than having to constantly build new catapults and hammer them to move them to the next boss. This skill also mentions a remote. This remote can be crafted with one electrical doodad, and with only this skill active, it does one thing, which is arming your catapults. When you use the arming ability, it will cost 1% durability on the remote, and any catapults inside the remote's massive 8-tile diameter area effect will be forced out of sleep mode and become active, attacking any hostile enemies nearby. Remember that when catapults are in sleep mode, they won't attack anything, and without the remote you have to manually arm them one at a time to get them out of sleep mode, so the remote expedites this process. The remote has a massive casting range of 7.5 tiles, so you can be 7.5 tiles away from the center of the remote casting area, so you can really control your catapults from a long distance away. This goes for all of the remote's future abilities too. An eagle-eyed viewer may have seen the other grayed out buttons on the remote. Don't worry, child, soon you will be controlling the catapults even more later. The remote is a gadget and has durability, which can be recharged by dropping the remote close to a charge generator. When you do this, a wire will protrude into the ground from the remote, indicating that it's connected to the nearby generator, although this wire stays in the ground even when the remote is fully charged. But when a gadget is fully charged, then the light on the gadget will turn off, unlike if it's still charging, then the light will still remain on. This recharging rule applies to all of Winona's items that count as gadgets, which I will point out when we come to them. It takes one remote a quarter of a day or 2 minutes to fully recharge from 0% durability. Also, funnily enough, despite there being values in the code to indicate that gadgets should drain generator fuel, charging any gadget at any generator just does not drain any fuel from that generator. Cool. Quick Charge is a skill that requires portability unlocked and says gadgets placed next to a generator or g.e.merator recharge 100% faster, so twice as fast. This skill is super skippable, as all gadgets, especially the remotes, recharge super fast already, and in the case of remotes, they're cheap to craft, so you can just rotate between multiple remotes while others charge, so I would skip this skill. Energy Saver says generators and g.e.merators no longer consume energy while they're not in use. Machines connected to generators won't consume energy while in sleep mode. Let's explain exactly what this does. Normally when you place a g.e.merator, it will slowly drain a small 6 units of power per minute all the time, even if nothing is connected to the g.e.merator, or 2.25 units of power per minute if using a generator. Then if you have structures connected to the generator, they will drain additional power, more if they're active and less if they're in sleep mode. With this skill, however, when a generator is active, it won't drain any power over time with nothing connected to it, and when there is something connected to it but it's in sleep mode, it still won't drain any power. Once a structure is connected and isn't in sleep mode though, then the normal power drain of both the generator and the structure connected resumes. This seems like a fine skill, as your generators ultimately no longer passively drain power, nor do structures in sleep mode drain power, but in my humble opinion, the passive drain is so minimal that this skill is not worth a skill point. And if you wanted to pause the drain on a generator because you know you're not going to be using it, you can just right click the generator to dismantle it and leave it on the floor, which of course deactivates it so it won't drain any power. This is also not to mention that this skill at the moment doesn't really do anything a lot of the time. This isn't the skill's fault, but when catapults switch states between being active and going to sleep, they don't always update their power drain, so even in sleep mode, they'll drain the amount of power equivalent to if they were active, but this is a bug and it might get fixed, who knows? Spacious Spotlight simply makes the spotlight structure light up a bigger area. Before it lit up almost a 12 wall unit diameter area, now it lights up about a 20 wall unit diameter area, which is 66.6% bigger than before. This upgrade also increases the minimum distance the light can aim at while also increasing the maximum distance it can aim at. With this skill, the radius in which it will target you is 2 wall units more than without the skill, increasing the tracking from 6 tiles to 6.5 tiles, ultimately keeping you out of the darkness up to 9 tiles away from the spotlight. This upgrade is pretty neat, as you can see a whole lot more with the spotlight without any additional light sources. Hotlight is a skill which makes your spotlight give off heat when it's cold. What this translates to exactly is when your spotlight turns on when it isn't summer, the Hotlight skill will activate, causing any spotlight you have interacted with to give off heat, which you can see as the animation on the spotlight becomes a flame. But not only that, this skill will also make spotlights activate during daytime, dusk, and nighttime during winter, rather than only nighttime as it did before. This way it will keep you warm throughout the entirety of winter. The Hotlight will give off heat when it's turned on in every season other than summer, where the skill specifically doesn't operate. Otherwise the light will still turn on at nighttime in summer, just without the skill active. The heating effect will roughly keep your temperature 40 degrees above the ambient in winter. This effect dampens if the ambient temperature of the world is warmer, so it's less effective in autumn and spring. So during winter, if the world ambient temperature is minus 20 degrees, the spotlight will keep your temperature at positive 20 degrees. And like every other heat source, it will dry you off if your wetness meter isn't already going up. The heating effect also applies to every player within the radius of light that is cast on the floor. So combining Hotlight and Spacious Spotlight will increase the heating area effect. Also, it will apply its heating effect equally regardless of your proximity to the center of the light. This skill is really good. Given that the range of the spotlight is huge, it will keep you warm in that massive area. Super handy for placing in your base or even close by in a long boss fight during winter to avoid freezing. To unlock the next shelf of the skill tree, you must learn 3 skills. I'd recommend Spacious Spotlight, Hotlight, and Portability. After unlocking the next shelf, you have access to a skill called Barrage. This skill says all catapults within range of your handy remote have an increased firing rate for a short period of time. Catapult attack rate puff? Yes please. Using your handy remote, you can cast Barrage in the same massive area of effect provided by the remote to cause all catapults inside the area of effect to have their attack rate increased by 50%? At least, that's what the code wants you to believe. In the code, it's clear the intended attack rate buff is 50%, but due to the flat animation time of the catapult's attack, which is not sped up by Barrage, the actual increase in attack rate goes from once every 3.25 seconds to once every 2.4167 seconds, which is an attack rate increase of 34.48%. Not quite the advertised 50% attack rate buff, but almost 35% is still good. Once you cast Barrage from your remote, the buff lasts for 20 seconds. So what does this do to your catapult's DPS? Well, taking the DPS from before of 13.077 per catapult, multiply that by the effective attack rate buff of 34.48%, and we get 17.586 DPS per catapult. Multiply that by the 9 catapults you can squeeze next to any generator, and we get 158.276 DPS, which is 8.6% more than Wilson with a Dark Sword constantly attacking. But that's not all. You only have to cast Barrage once every 20 seconds. So for 19 seconds, you as Winona could also be attacking with a Dark Sword, adding an additional 138.429 DPS, which gives us a combined DPS from Winona with a Dark Sword and 9 catapults under the effect of Barrage of about 296.7. This DPS is more than double that of Wilson with a Dark Sword and 1.8% more DPS than Mighty Wolfgang with a Dark Sword constantly attacking. Nice. So this is an awesome skill which with the right setup will beat Wolfgang's DPS, and all of the catapult's damage is area of effect and doesn't suffer from hit stun delay, unlike players. Important note, the catapults will still drain the 4 units of power per shot from a g.e.merator, 1.5 units from a generator, but now they fire faster, so you may notice your generator's fuel depleting up to 34.48% faster. This skill is great value, 1 skill point to buff your catapult's DPS by almost 35%, but what if I wanted to buff my DPS further? Precise targeting is a skill that says all catapults within range of your handy remote fire at your selected target. That's right, with this skill and your remote, you can manually control where your catapults aim. Cast from the remote has an outer radius and an inner radius. For the cast to affect a catapult, said catapult must be inside the outer radius but outside the inner radius. That's because, like we said before, the catapults have a minimum and maximum range, so can't fire too close to or too far from themselves. The central circular target reticle presented by the remote is a decent representation of the catapult's area effect. With 9 catapults and good positioning, you can control all 9 catapults with precise targeting cast to fire at an enemy, even a boss. You can tell if your cast will affect the catapult or not by paying attention to the circle around the catapult. If it's green, it will be affected by the precise shot cast. This is handy for firing at things which catapults wouldn't normally attack automatically, such as Crab King turret towers and the environment overall. There are a few other hidden mechanics with this ability. Firstly, there is a queue, which will store 3 commands in it at a time. So if you click 4 times, the first attack is instantly cast, and the remaining 3 commands are stored in a queue, which are executed after each attack until the queue is empty. This means upon starting to fire your catapult, you should spam click 4 times. Then after each time your catapults attack after that, you should click again to fill the queue back up to ensure you're firing at maximum attack rate. If you were to just spam click forever, you would just waste a bit of remote control durability for no gain. And secondly, and most importantly, the catapults sure do look like they're firing quite a bit faster than before. Suspiciously fast. That's because they are firing faster, like a lot faster. The side effect of precise targeting is that by utilizing the remote and the command queue, your catapult will fire once every 1.133 recurring seconds, which is 2.868 times faster than with no skills, and 2.132 times faster than just using Barrage. This is a major attack rate buff, which of course buffs the DPS of the catapults even more so than before. The DPS now of 9 catapults under the effect of precise targeting constantly firing is 337.5, which is 2.316 times more than Wilson with a Dark Sword, and 15.8% more than Mighty Wolfgang with a Dark Sword. That's insane. Of course, since you're having to constantly use the remote to cast precise targeting, Winona herself can't attack, but despite that, you still out DPS Wolfgang, at least in theory. Whereas in practice, you actually out DPS Wolfgang even more, since when any player, including Wolfgang, gets hit, they receive some hit stun which delays their next attack. Whereas if Winona is spamming precise targeting and gets hit, the command queue of 3 attacks is still in effect. So even if Winona is knocked out of action for 2 seconds, the catapults will continue attacking at their full attack rate. This all assumes, of course, that you are actually hitting the enemy with your catapult shots and not missing. So what this usually comes down to is you have to tank the enemy to keep it still so your catapults don't miss. In my all boss rush with Winona, this is what I did. I tanked most of the bosses and obliterated them with 9 catapults. Or, well, more catapults, but we'll talk about that later in the skill tree section. You can, of course, use more than 9 catapults to achieve more damage, but I'm going to use 9 catapults as a baseline, as you can fit 9 catapults around a generator. And lastly, since you're firing up to 2.87 times faster than normal, you will drain fuel from the generators connected to each catapult faster too. This drain gets quite noticeable if you're using the small generator with nitrate as fuel. You'll need to refuel it at least once during a boss fight like Claws, but this can be helped with some skills later. Rapid Fire 1, 2, and 3 are 3 skills which buff the attack rate of catapults. Level 1 buffs the attack rate by 5%, level 2 by 10%, and level 3 by 20%. This sounds good, right? An extra attack rate buff? Well, unfortunately, the advertised attack rate buff isn't quite accurate. So without any other skills and just using Rapid Fire 3, which advertises a 20% attack rate buff, the actual attack rate increase is, 14.035%. So not quite 20%, but still notable. If you opted to go for just Rapid Fire 1, you'd get a 3.17% attack rate increase, and Rapid Fire 2 would get you a 6.56% attack rate increase. But what if I use Barrage and Rapid Fire 3? Do they stack? Well, yes, they do stack. So if we recall, spending 1 point on Barrage buffs the effective attack speed by 34.48%. But if you add Rapid Fire 3 on top of Barrage, the effective attack rate increase becomes 51.16%. Nice! So clearly the two buffs multiply together to make a buff bigger than the buffs individually. Buff. But what if I'm using precise targeting spam? Well, I'm sorry to say that if you're manually targeting your catapults, then Rapid Fire and Barrage have absolutely no effect on the attack rate. The attack rate of manually firing is the fastest attack rate you can achieve. This is both good and bad. Bad if you wanted to have an even faster attack rate, but good since if you wanted to manually target anyway, then it only costs unlocking precise targeting for the fastest possible attack rate, as you can ignore Rapid Fire and Barrage. Here's some Excel gaming to show the DPS of each scenario. Thank you Arkwell for the attack rate testing data, which this table is based off of. How I see this is you either use your catapults passively, so you want Barrage and maybe Rapid Fire along with attacking the enemy yourself, or you use the catapults fully manually, so ignore Barrage and Rapid Fire for precise targeting for higher damage and you won't have to attack the enemy. I would ignore Rapid Fire 3 since it costs 3 skill points for a buff which is less than half as effective as Barrage, which costs 1 point, but it's up to you. We're going to be diving deeper into Catapult DPS comparisons later on when we unlock more Catapult skills, so hold tight till then. Explosive Volley 1, 2, and 3 are skills which increase the air effect of your catapult strikes by 25, 50, and 100%. This doesn't directly increase your damage, but if you're manually firing or even auto-firing, sometimes you may miss due to the target moving. For example, if Claws is walking with catapults auto-firing, they will rarely hit him until he stops moving. Whereas if you unlock Explosive Volley 1 and increase the AoE by 25%, the catapults will hit a walking Claws more often. More often again with Explosive Volley 2, and they will always hit if you have Explosive Volley 3 active. With Explosive Volley 3, while aiming at the center of a tile, you'll hit in a radius of 2.5 wall units, which is basically the entire interior of the tile and a little bit outside of the tile directly above, below, and to each side of the tile. The target reticle from the remote control does not increase in size to represent the Explosive Volley's bigger AoE unfortunately, so the central circle is only representative of the default catapult AoE with no skills. So yeah, technically it doesn't increase your DPS, but in practice it usually will increase your DPS due to less attacks missing, and of course effectively extends the catapult's range due to the increased area effect. Pretty good skills, although they're not essential. I'd still try to get at least one of these skills in my skill tree. Greater Generator 1, 2, and 3 are simple skills which boost the efficiency of all generators with any fuel in them by 25, 50, and 100%. So with Greater Generator 3, it will take twice as long for the generator to drain to 0 fuel than if you had no Greater Generator skills enabled. These skills, in my humble opinion, are basically essential if you're going to be precise target spamming, since with these 3 skills and a Nitro fuel generator, you will definitely need to refuel the generator at least once during a boss fight, even a short boss fight like Claws. Even ignoring a precise targeting spam, I'll still recommend these 3 skills, and for the rest of this guide, we're going to always have Greater Generator 3 enabled, so I'll always be showing the reduced generator drain as a result of Greater Generator 3. Now we're done with the second shelf, we're moving on to the third and final shelf, which includes the Shadow and Lunar related skills. Let's start with the Shadow side. Nightmare Generator is an interesting skill which says, learn how to utilize Nightmare Fuel as a fuel source for generators. This is awesome. No longer do you need to go out of your way to mine nitrate to fuel your generator in the early game. Simply use any excess nightmare fuel you have to fuel the generator. Of course, Nightmare Generator has little use if you have lots of gems to burn and are using a g.e.merator, but in the early game you probably don't have a lot of gems to burn, so Nightmare Generator is pretty great. When you have this skill unlocked, you can use Nightmare Fuel on a generator to fill the generator by 50%, though it doesn't work with a g.e.merator, so 2 Nightmare Fuels will fill the generator up completely. But wait, it also takes 2 nitrate to fill up the generator, so is the Nightmare Fuel the same as nitrate? Well actually no. Despite it taking 2 Nightmare Fuel to fill up the generator, the Nightmare Fuel type is 2 times as efficient as nitrate, which just means it lasts 2 times longer than nitrate fuel. You can tell which fuel type is in the generator as the fuel level markers are colored depending on the fuel type, nitrate being yellow and Nightmare Fuel being orange. If you put Nightmare Fuel in while the generator already has nitrate fuel inside of it, the Nightmare Fuel will go on top of the nitrate fuel and then replace the nitrate fuel if the generator gets full. So since we've been using generator efficiency, combining this with Nightmare Nightmare generator, your generator will last 4 times longer filled with Nightmare fuel versus filled with Night Tray with no generator efficiency skills. This enables you to precise target spam some boss fights without having to refuel the generator mid-fight like claws. This is a great skill for the early game, I would recommend it. Pure Horror generator is a skill which says, you can probably guess, learn how to utilize pure horror as a fuel source for generators. Putting a pure horror into a generator will fully fill up the generator with a red colored power bar, and pure horror is just as efficient as Nightmare fuel. So 1 pure horror versus 2 Nightmare fuels, they will both fill up the generator to 100%, and both will power structures for as long as each other. But that is not all what this skill does. When pure horror is in a generator and catapults are hooked up to that pure horror fuel generator, the normal catapult strikes become horror strikes, turning the grey boulders into black and red balls of evil. This looks cool but does offer a practical use too. These shadow balls, as we'll call them, deal 47 damage, 30 of which being planar damage and the remaining 17 being physical damage. Oh no, planar damage. Oh, don't worry, I'm like halfway through writing this script and I'm almost certain I won't need to show any planar math in this video, so consider yourself lucky this time. Anyway, so the shadow balls deal 47 damage compared to the original damage of 42.5. This is a 10.6% increase in damage. Plugging this into our charts from earlier, here's the new DPSs. Since these count as shadow aligned attacks, they also deal 10% extra damage versus lunar enemies. But we're not going to focus on this new increase in DPS because who on earth is going to be using pure horror as normal fuel for a generator? Unless anyone who does this is a madman overflowing with Nightmare Werepig kills, so let's move on. Oh wait, hold on. We have a little note here from Arkwell. One second. It says, anyone who uses pure horror as normal fuel for a generator is coping about Wilson's skill tree? What the hell? Shadow Strike is a skill which requires portability and pure horror generator unlocked to access, and it says use your handy remote to select a target for a shadow infused catapult attack. Wow. So on your remote you have unlocked your final control, being Planar Strike. Shadow infused Planar Strike will only work with catapults that are hooked up to a generator which is fueled with pure horror. It will not work if it isn't fueled at least partially with pure horror. When you do cast the Shadow infused strike, it will drain 10 times more fuel than a normal shot, about 15 units of power. But if you have greater generator 3, it will drain 7.5 units of power. In comparison, a normal catapult shot would drain 0.75 units of power with efficiency skills. After that, it will fire off and deal 30 planar damage upon impacting, which isn't a lot of damage, so I'm not going to calculate the shot's DPS itself, but the shot will leave behind a patch of spiky rose vines in its wake. The size of the patch of rose vines will be the catapult's AoE, which is indeed made bigger with the explosive volley skills, which for the rest of this section, I'll be showing the spiky rose vines with explosive volley 3 enabled, so the area of effect is doubled. These roses do a couple of things. Firstly, they only affect ground enemies and not flying enemies. RIP, this would have actually been quite useful against the Twins of Terror, which are like the arch nemesis of Winona's catapult. Watch my Winona boss rush video if you want to see why that is. Anyway, the effects of these vines are they apply a speed modifier to ground enemies, slowing them down by 1/3. The vines will deal 14 physical damage and 20 planar damage to any mob that tries to move while on the vines, totaling 34 damage. And this will only damage a mob if they haven't taken rose vine damage in the last 1.5 seconds. So effectively, a 1.5 second cooldown for each individual mob. So it can potentially deal 22.6666666. I'm not going to say all the sixes. DPS per mob over the rose vine's lifetime of 5 minutes. Note that if a mob stands still on top of the vines and does not attempt to move, they will not receive damage. They will only receive damage when the mob actually attempts to move and hasn't received rose vine damage in the last 1.5 seconds. Also, for whatever reason, if a mob is caged by Maxwell, that movement prevention stops the mob from taking the vine damage, but in every other situation where the mob is attempting to move but not changing positions like walking against walls, they still get hit. So a Maxwell cage breaks the rose vine's damage. But neat, very cool, thanks Maxwell. This Shadow Strike ability is good against Ancient Fuel Weaver, as before the fight starts, you can litter the arena in these rose vines. Then when Fuel Weaver spawns his healers, they will instantly die once they move, as they'll be crawling on top of the vines. Littering arenas with these vines before a fight starts is a good strategy due to the before mentioned fact that the rose vines last for 5 minutes. But catapults always had an area of effect even before Winona's skill tree, which handled the woven shadows just as fine with catapults, since they would target Fuel Weaver and the splash damage would kill any woven shadows that got too close to him. This ability is decent against other ground bosses like the possessed Varg and the Nightmare Werepig, making it beneficial to cover the area in rose vines before starting the fight. As a best case example, if you covered the Nightmare Werepig area in rose vines and the fight took 5 minutes, the rose vines themselves could have dealt up to 4,533 damage over those 5 minutes before they despawned. That's a substantial amount of damage over time, taking out almost half the boss's health. But of course, this is in theory, and in practice you probably won't achieve that much, but it's noteworthy. So consider this ability for any ground boss that takes more than a couple of minutes to kill and moves around a lot. Now let's take a short break from all this catapult yapping and move on to Shadow Seeker 1. The Shadow Seeker skill says says. It doesn't actually really tell you at all what the skill does, like at all. So let's just talk about what it does. Unlocking this skill unlocks a craftable item for Winona, being the rose-colored glasses, using 12 petals from picking flowers and 3 sticks. Once you craft these glasses, you can wear them to get an obnoxious overlay on your screen, but you will put up with this overlay for the glasses' powerful effects. While you have the glasses equipped, you can inspect things that are Charlie related, which is basically any structure related to shadow stuff like the stage that spawns on the map, the florid postern, touchstones, and a lot of other things in the ruins in the caves. But surprisingly not the stagehand. Anyway, inspecting something Charlie and or shadow related by holding Alt and right clicking will examine the structure and cause a dark vestige to appear. Once you interact with this, a shadow hand will appear and give you a nightmare fuel. This inspection for nightmare fuel has a cooldown of 4 minutes or half a day. This is a fine way to get some free easy nightmare fuel in the early days, which can be used to fuel your generators. Man, you know when sometimes there's just a little bit of water between you and the place you want to go? Well, with the glasses second effect, if you right click on a straight edge near the water while wearing the glasses, Winona will inspect the edge and a dark vestige will again appear. Interacting with this will cause a bridge of rose vines to grow between you and the other side of the water, allowing you to cross without obstruction. This rose bridge is up to 3 tiles long and lasts for plenty of time, 18 seconds, for you and your teammates to cross. Even if you miss the bridge, this ability has no cooldowns, you can make vine bridges as much as you like. The option to inspect won't appear if the edge isn't straight or if the destination is too far away or if there are items in the water blocking the bridge. This ability works in the overworld and also works in the caves. You can inspect gaps in the void in the same way as you can water to make rose bridges in the caves to cross the void between cave biomes. Very neat, as sometimes biomes like Fuel Weaver can be close enough such that you can see it and even use a road bridge to access it. This is an awesome second ability for easily cutting across world generation and landmasses, giving you access to biomes in the overworld and caves which you may have otherwise had to walk a long way to access via land bridges rather than crossing water or void. Shadow Seeker 2 requires Shadow Seeker 1 to be unlocked, surprisingly, along with not having Founders Keepers 2 unlocked, which we didn't talk about yet, but it's basically the lunar skill of Winona's skill tree. Now, when you inspect things that are much more related to Charlie or the shadows, like an ancient pseudoscience station or basically anything else in the ruins, you get a 25% chance of receiving a pure horror instead of a nightmare fuel. This gives you potential super early game access to pure horror for your shadow infused strikes. Otherwise, after unlocking Shadow Seeker 2, you unlock 3 new abilities. Firstly, even without wearing the glasses, you are now granted complete Charlie immunity. She will never attack you in the dark, though you will still lose extra sanity from standing in the dark like normal. This is neat until you remember that you can't do any fighting or working when you're standing in the dark. So this is for sure a neat ability if you get stuck in the dark unexpectedly, but otherwise, Secondly, you can examine a flower while wearing the glasses to turn it into a rose, and a dark vestige will appear. After interacting with the vestige, the rose will disappear and appear in your inventory and is transformed into a fragile rose. This fragile rose is, well, fragile. If you drop it, it will break, and it cannot be stored anywhere except in Winona's inventory. The effect of this rose is, if you unfortunately perish while holding the rose, something special happens. You will be dragged away by rose vines and will respawn at the florid postern. After the rose revives you, it is left where you died, so you lose the fragile rose from your inventory. If you have a nightlight built in the world, then you will respawn at the nightlight before it respawns you at the florid postern. If you have multiple nightlights, then you will respawn at the closest nightlight relative to where you died. The rose keeps your items from dropping onto the floor when you die, so your inventory and worn items will be as they were before you died. You respawn at 50 health and you keep your hunger and sanity values from before you died, or a minimum of 30 hunger and 35 sanity if they were below that. Thanks Arkwell, wow. This is a free automatic revive that uses up an inventory space courtesy of Charlie, so it's not bad and very cheap given that all you have to do is examine a flower to transform it into a rose and then examine the rose. The act of transforming a flower into a rose and getting the fragile rose has a cooldown of 4 minutes, so you can't be dying too often, though if you do be dying a lot, you can hold multiple fragile roses at once, and only one will be consumed when you do die. Thirdly is the most powerful ability these glasses grant in my humble opinion. Examining a wormhole with the glasses equipped will once again make a dark vestige appear. After examining the vestige, your map will be opened with all the wormholes that you have discovered being highlighted with rose petals. Right-clicking any wormhole will close your map and Winona will jump through the wormhole and appear at your chosen wormhole. So now, you can choose which wormhole you come out of when you teleport through any other wormhole. This gives you super early and cheap access to the entire wormhole network for free, so so long as you base near a wormhole. Then you can teleport to any other wormhole that you have already discovered on the map. Note that you do need to already have a wormhole revealed on the map to be able to select it as a destination, so you will need to explore the map beforehand. This also works for tentapillars in the caves, but note you do need to defeat the tentapillar before you can examine it and teleport with it. And of course, you need to have found the tentapillar that you want to teleport to already to get to it. Luckily for you, bringing along a generator and a catapult or two will make short work of a tentapillar due to it attacking from a distance and having an AoE to kill the little tentacles if need be. This is an awesome ability as you can teleport all over the world and caves for free, and all you must do to unlock it in game is make the rose colored glasses, which are super cheap to make. This is the ability I used in my Winona boss rush for easy navigation around the map by basing near any wormhole. Then combining this with the rose vine bridges to traverse water means your exploration is limited only by your imagination and the big ocean. Now you may think this skill is the shadow affinity and the opposite side of the skill tree is the lunar affinity, but technically neither are an affinity because Winona does not gain a damage bonus versus opposite alignment enemies, nor a damage reduction versus same alignment enemies, and both affinities do not require Fuel Weaver or Celestial Champion to be killed to unlock them. So the affinities are more so Charlie versus Wagstaff? Don't starve. Now let's move over to the other side of the skill tree, and that means we're hopping back into catapult buffs. Yippee! Enlightened G.E.M.erator is a skill which says learn how to utilize enlightened shards as a fuel source for generators. What exactly does this mean? Well, like how nightmare fuel can be used as an alternate fuel in generators, you can now place enlightened shards into generators as a fuel source. Enlightened shards are obtained by deconstructing the enlightened crown, which is obtained by killing Celestial Champion. Celestial Champion themselves also drop an enlightened shard upon death. Enlightened shards as fuel work way differently than other forms of fuel, so let's dive in. The enlightened shard will never be consumed by the G.E.M.erator, nor will any other fuel in the G.E.M.erator be consumed while an enlightened shard is inside of it. This means enlightened shards grant infinite energy. Wow. But after the shard has been drained of so much power in a short amount of time, it will burn out and deactivate itself and the G.E.M.erator until the shard recovers from being burnt out, which takes 10 seconds, so you want to avoid this. To avoid burning the shard out, you must stop draining the G.E.M.erator for a very short time to allow the shard's recharge effects delay to finish so that it begins to recharge its capacity. This can be seen by looking at the blue bars on the G.E.M.erator. As you use power, it will drain, then after you haven't used power for a short time, the delay before the shard recharges finishes, and then the G.E.M.erator will begin to recharge. When it does begin to recharge, it does so very quickly. One shard only provides 2 blue bars of power though, so it doesn't have a very high capacity. But you can plug, for example, 2 random gems in with the shard to increase the power capacity of the shard before it will need recharging without the G.E.M.erator consuming the gems. The greater generator skills do affect how much power is drained from the shard, therefore how fast they burn out, as well as how fast they recharge, so I would highly recommend the greater efficiency generator skill as well. With greater generator 3, 9 catapults, and a G.E.M.erator with 1 shard and 2 gems inside of it, you can do 10 continuous precise targeting shots without burning out the shard. The 11th shot would burn out the shard. After doing 10 continuous shots, you would need to wait a couple of seconds to let the shard's recharge cooldown to finish so that it can begin recharging to its full capacity, and then let it finish recharging before starting again. Okay, so the shard provides infinite energy, but you can only drain so much power in a short time without being punished. But what if I used more than 1 shard? You can plug multiple shards into the same G.E.M.erator, which does a few things. Firstly, it increases the power capacity of the G.E.M.erator, the same as if you plugged an extra gem in. Then when you do manage to drain the fuel down, the time it takes to begin recharging and the recharging time of the shard's capacity itself is half with 2 shards than with 1 shard. Though for now, you'll never notice this because with 2 shards in a G.E.M.erator, 9 catapults, and firing those 9 catapults at maximum attack rate at the same time with precise targeting, the shards will never have enough power drain on them to reduce the fuel indicator on the G.E.M.erator as they recharge fast enough to keep up, so with this setup, you have truly achieved infinite fuel. Except if you desync one of the catapults, because then the shards can't recharge between the volleys from the other 8 catapults, as the desynced catapult interrupts the recharge delay, so the shards will burn out. This will be your biggest obstacle when using shards for fuel sources. When your catapults desync, the fuel on your G.E.M.erator will get absolutely annihilated, so try to keep your catapults in sync. Syncing up catapult attacks is pretty simple, just stop firing and let your catapult command queue run out and leave the catapults not firing idle for like 1 second, then start firing again. This only applies to manually firing the catapults. If the catapults are auto-firing, even if they're desynced, it's unlikely that they'll be desynced enough to burn out the shards from my testing. Anyway, this is huge! For any farm with lots of catapults, simply plug 2 shards in and the shards will never burn out. This saves you from worrying about fueling generators forever. For your base, 1 shard will be enough to power passive structures like spotlights and recharge all of your gadgets. But realistically, how many generators can you power with these shards? Well, killing 1 Celestial Champion gets you 1 shard, and the crown can be deconstructed for 5 additional shards. You'll probably want to sacrifice 1 shard the Wagstaff to get Pure Brilliance later, so you have 5 shards to play with. This could be 1 shard at your base to power a spotlight and other gadgets and whatnot, along with 2 G.E.M.erators with 2 shards each in to power 2 sets of catapults. The only way to pull them back out of the G.E.M.erator is by hammering the G.E.M.erator, forcing it to drop the shards and gems and destroying the G.E.M.erator itself for half the ingredients back, since dismantling the G.E.M.erator keeps the shards and gems stored inside the G.E.M.erator. A small tidbit brought to you by Arkwell: since Enlightened G.E.M.erators substitute the fuel of the G.E.M.erator for its own cooldown mechanic, gadgets have no passive drain when hooked up to the G.E.M.erators, so the energy saver skill will do absolutely nothing to help. You can plug 3 shards into a G.E.M.erator, but 2 is almost always enough, and regardless, with the next skill, you'll want to save that 3rd slot for something other than a 3rd shard. Brilliance G.E.M.erator says learn how to utilize Pure Brilliance as a fuel source for G.E.M.erators. You can now place Pure Brilliance into a G.E.M.erator. Pure Brilliance is obtained from killing mutated bosses or mining the crystals near a lunar rift after you've given the aforementioned shard to Wagstaff after killing the Celestial Champion. Pure Brilliance by itself provides as much power as a gem when socketed into a G.E.M.erator, but grants an effect similar to Pure Horror, which is your normal boulders are turned into glowing lunar shots, or we'll call them illuminated balls. These illuminated balls deal the same damage as shadow balls, being 30 planar and 17 physical damage, totaling 47 damage. Except of course, these balls are lunar aligned, so deal 10% more damage versus shadow aligned targets. This is cool and all, but how about we combine 1 Pure Brilliance with 2 Enlightened Shards? Haha, now we've increased our catapult's DPS by 10.6% from the illuminated balls' damage, and we have infinite energy to continuously fire at maximum attack rate speed with precise targeting. Nice! This is the same DPS as the catapults with Pure Horror for fuel, so here's those charts again. From now on, when I refer to catapult's normal damage, I am using illuminated or shadow balls damage for that, so 47. Since once you have Pure Brilliance and Enlightened Shards, it's just a free damage boost and there's no need to use gems, nitrate, or nightmare fuel for fuel anymore. This will be the G.E.M.erator setup you'll be using after you've defeated the Celestial Champion. Infinite fuel and a slight increase in DPS. Awesome. But wait, what if we combined a Pure Brilliance G.E.M.erator and a Pure Horror generator? What happens? Well, when a catapult is being powered by both generators, one with Pure Brilliance and one with Pure Horror, you create a new type of ball. Mixed shadow and illuminated balls. We shall call them Illuminated Horror Balls. These Illuminated Horror Balls deal 40 planar damage and 8.5 physical damage, and are granted both shadow and lunar damage bonuses. So hitting a shadow or lunar aligned enemy will grant the catapults 10% extra damage. The total damage only beats a pure illuminated or shadow ball by 1.5, but otherwise more of its damage is weighted toward planar, so if you're fighting a planar enemy, these illuminated horror balls will be better than pure illuminated or shadow balls, but I'm going to ignore these ball types for the rest of the video and won't include them in DPS calculations, because a catapult setup using 2 different generators limits the amount of flexibility you have with placing your catapults, and the next skill is about to make these illuminated horror balls completely redundant. Next we have the lunar version of the Shadow Planar Strike, called Enlightened Strike. This strike is much different than its shadow counterpart. This strike will only work if there is at least 1 Pure Brilliance inside of your G.E.M.erator. If there's no Pure Brilliance, then the strike will not fire. This means you can use 1 Pure Brilliance and 2 Enlightened Shards. Perfect. Upon commanding a catapult to do this strike, it will cause a massive drain of 160 units of power on your G.E.M.erator, and it will let out a mega powerful illuminated ball, dealing 120 pure planar damage and destroying things in its area of effect. Wow! So not only has your catapult damage gone from 42.5 to 47 and then to 120, but that 120 damage is pure planar damage, so it will pierce any physical damage reduction and it will pierce any planar entity resistance. That's a huge increase in damage, but we'll talk more about the effects of the DPS in a second, because first, let's talk about the destruction effect. The Enlightened Strike has a destruction effect, destroying anything except most player structures within its area of effect, which again is influenced by the explosive volley skills. The destruction effect is useful for chopping and digging trees in one strike, mining mass amounts of rocks, mining mass amounts of rock fruits or pure brilliance, and basically destroying anything in the environment or any other farming variation where you require area effect destruction. Even while farming giant crops, the strike will dig them up and then a subsequent shot will destroy them. The shot is a destructive one, but it doesn't destroy most things you wouldn't want it to. So basically every player structure is safe from destruction, except for a few exceptions, including but not limited to Merm fortifications built by Wirt. Otherwise, anything that you've planted would also be torn up by the destruction effect of the Enlightened Strike. So hold your horses when you're about to fire an Enlightened Strike at deadly bright shades that have infested your not fully grown farm plants, because it will rip them up. Also, the Enlightened Strike destroys statues from the Potter's Wheel, which is pretty devastating, but it just means you've got to use walls to block enemies rather than statues when using this Enlightened Strike. If you Planar Strike while the Catapult is hooked up to a pure Brilliance G.E.M.erator and a pure Horror Generator, and you have the necessary skills enabled, your Planar Strike will do both effects of both affinities, dealing 120 pure planar damage, planting a patch of rose vines, and getting the destruction effect. This is cool, but I'm not going to explore it any more than just saying it exists, because it's not a super practical nor effective setup, as even if you use the shards in the G.E.M.erator, the fuel drain is still split between the Horror Generator and the Infinite Fuel G.E.M.erator, so you will need to keep fueling it with pure Horror. Rarely will you want both effects at the same time. Usually you'll set up the rose vines before a fight, then use the Enlightened Strike for the fight. Otherwise, the only practical application I can think of is getting the 10% damage buff versus lunar aligned enemies, so you'd get 132 pure planar damage versus crystal Deerclops using the mixed planar strike rather than 120 with just the Enlightened Strike. Anyway, moving on, it's time to discuss our newfound DPS potential. Our catapults are dealing over 2.8 times more damage than a boulder catapult shot, but as we know, planar strike drains substantially more power than a default shot, and given that we need a pure brilliance socketed, the best we can do is 1 pure brilliance and 2 shards per generator. You can of course plug 1 pure brilliance and 2 gems in to never have the risk of burning out shards, but I'm going to opt to use shards for this DPS test since it's sustainable without burning through gems and pure brilliance, but we'll compare the shards versus gems soon. Using 1 G.E.M.erator with 1 pure brilliance and 2 shards in it, along with a greater generator efficiency skill 3 enabled, 4 catapults connected, and constantly firing Enlightened Strikes at maximum attack rate, you can perform 10 Enlightened Strikes before the shards burn out on the 11th strike. But while watching, you can see the shards are almost recharging in time before each volley. So what this means is you either time your shots to be ever so slightly slower each shot, so your shards always has the opportunity to stay close to the maximum capacity, or every 10th shot you delay your next volley of shots by not even half a second to let the G.E.M.erator recharge before starting again. Alternatively, you can just use 3 catapults with the G.E.M.erator, that way you never need to pause firing. If you were using gems and pure brilliance, you'd plug 1 pure brilliance in and then 2 gems on top of it, then you can do 9 lots of 4 Enlightened Strikes before the G.E.M.erator burns through both your gems and the pure brilliance, and you'd have to refuel it, which is of course worse than using 1 pure brilliance and 2 shards, as you'd have to refuel the G.E.M.erator more often than you would have to wait for the shards to recharge using the shard method. So for the DPS calculations, I'll assume you fire 10 shots from each catapult, then stop firing for 1 second before starting over. Plugging this into the Excel, we can see that, oh, Enlightened Strike is only a little bit better than precise targeting spam. But wait, that's because Enlightened Strike can only use 4 catapults per G.E.M.erator, which also uses up a lot less room. So we could set up a second set of 4 catapults opposite of the first setup. Doing this requires 4 shards and 2 brilliance, which is fine since an Enlightened Crown gives 5 shards. With this setup, our DPS skyrockets to a huge 778.38. That's such a huge amount of DPS that I will need to draw a comparison. Giving Mighty Wolfgang a Dark Sword and a Wily cooking him up a Volt Goat Shell Freud spiced with chili flakes, then Wolfgang slapping a wet target, Wolfgang's DPS will be 874.29. Except it won't be, because Wolfgang can't hold F without being interrupted by getting attacked. So if Wolfgang is tanking and holding F versus a fully wet Dragonfly, Wolfgang's DPS is actually about 789.68, which brings it much closer to 8 Enlightened Catapults. This all to say, Winona is capable of a very high DPS while also having a reasonable degree of portability, setup, effort, and consistency, which can't be said for other high DPS scenarios, which require either a ridiculously high effort setup or multiple characters. But maybe I'll make a video one day on the highest possible level of damage in the game. Anyway, just for fun, you could add another set of catapults to this layout at the top or bottom. This leaves one side of the battleground open to lure bosses in before you demolish them. With a setup of 12 Enlightened Catapults, your DPS will go to 1,167, which is just insanity. This would kill Deerclops in less than 4 seconds, and the subsequent Crystal Deerclops in less than 6 seconds, killing it before it could even attack. Not a lot of methods come close to demolishing planar enemies as fast as these catapults. And just to draw a comparison again, if you gave Wolfgang literally every buff under the sun, being Full Goat Jelly Electric Damage, Chili Spice, Abigail's Vex, Wickford's Affinity Song, Warber's Headgear at maximum target, Wolfgang triple Affinity Skills, Wolfgang's Mightiness status and Blow Darts instead of a Dark Sword, firing from a distance so he doesn't get interrupted, the DPS would be 2316.6, which is just insane, but it requires, of course, an expensive weapon and a bunch of different buffs from different characters. But then if we did the same scenario, except Wolfgang is fighting a planar entity like Crystal Deerclops, his DPS is now 499.24. Changing every scenario in this chart to also be fighting a planar entity shows how powerful the planar damage of the infused catapult shots are, as enlightened catapult scenarios out DPS pure physical solutions from Wolfgang, with 8 enlightened catapults surpassing Wolfgang with every buff using blow darts. But this is fighting a planar entity, so yeah, wow, very cool. Anyway, that's enough DPS, let's move on. If you wanted to build 1, 2, or 3 Enlightened Strike stations like I have, then all you have to do is figure out where you want the target tile to be, then count exactly 4 tiles horizontally or vertically away from that target tile, and put your G.E.M.erator there. Then place your 4 catapults as close to the edge of the G.E.merator's area effect as possible in the direction of the target tile. When placing the first catapult, you want it to mirror the opposite catapult, so place it on the left side of the central divide of the G.E.merator's circle, then the other 3 catapults will be easy to place to finish your symmetrical setup. Repeat this for however many enlightened striking stations you want. Anyway, this is the ultimate endgame setup for Winona's catapults. 3 or 4 catapults hooked up to a G.E.M.erator with 2 shards and a pure brilliance. You get better DPS than 9 catapults using precise targeting, and it costs no fuel. It can sometimes be very awkward to use catapults against bosses if the fight goes on for too long, but if the boss dies super fast with an 8 or 12 enlightened catapult setup, then it's actually quite fun, and usually bosses do die very fast with that many enlightened catapults. From my experience playing with this skill, I ended up having a dedicated army of catapults set up near my base to kill bosses. Then I would pick these catapults up if I needed them to kill a boss which I couldn't bring to the catapults, like Celestial Champion or Fuel Weaver. Then in day-to-day running around, I'd always carry a pocket G.E.M.erator and a pocket catapult with a remote to quickly deploy and destroy or kill mobs that I ran into using Enlightened Strike. So that's how I'd recommend using the skill. Anyway, that's enough about Enlightened Strike. I hope you enjoyed the DPS comparisons. We're finally leaving the catapult talk and going to Founders Keepers 1. This skill says, build a device inspired by the cryptic Founders designs to track down hidden supply caches. Gain mastery over all technology found in cache boxes. This sounds very mysterious, so let's break it down. Unlocking this skill unlocks a recipe for Inspectacles, costing a set of fashion goggles and 2 electrical doodads. Fashion goggles can be crafted at a science machine with 1 gold and 1 pigskin. When you equip these Inspectacles, they will reveal a cache box which would have spawned close by to you when you put the Inspectacles on. The helmet will pulse on the edge of your screen to indicate the direction of the cache box. Once you find it, you can interact with it for it to spew out a bunch of tools and materials for you to take. Sometimes the cache box will have an Among Us tier puzzle on it before you can open it. To solve the puzzle, simply rotate all the components in the puzzle so all the components' wires are connected to another component's wires. Once you've looted the cache box, the Inspectacles go on cooldown for 4 minutes before spawning the next cache box while they're equipped. You can tell when the helmet is off cooldown, as when the helmet is ready to reveal another cache box, the inventory icon will have a solid light on top of the helmet. The materials and tools you get from the cache boxes are as follows. You can get electrical doodads, scrap, doohickeys, and a tool, the Calibrated Perceiver. Both the doohickey and the Calibrated Perceiver can only be held in Winona's inventory, and if you drop them and leave them on the floor for too long, they will despawn as they seem to be a projection and not physically in the Don't Starve world. The Calibrated Perceiver can be used to scan any prototypable item to unlock their crafting recipe. For example, you could defeat Claws, open his sack, and scan a bundled wrap to unlock the bundling wrap recipe, so you don't need to kill Bee Queen for it. Once you have used the Calibrated Perceiver to unlock a recipe, it is consumed and it disappears. This tool unlocks a very neat machine exclusively for Winona. If you find the scrapyard, which typically spawns in the Mandrake Forest, you'll find a Wobot. Instead of repairing and bringing Wobot back to life, simply scan his mangled corpse with a Calibrated Perceiver to unlock Winbot, the superior beep boop robot. Winbot requires 8 scrap, 4 electrical doodads, and 3 doohickeys to craft. Those same doohickeys that the caches were giving you. Doohickeys are only used for Winbot's crafting recipe and nothing else at the time of recording. What does little Winbot do? Well, he will clean the base. Winbot has a large detection radius of 15 wall units or 3.75 tiles when you place him down. Inside of this area, any item on the floor will be put inside of any container type that already contains that item. For example, if there's some grass on the floor, then you put a different piece of grass in a chest, Winbot will go and pick up the grass on the floor and put it in the chest. Winbot will deposit items into any container type except shadow-like containers such as Maxwell's Magician Chest and Shadow Chester, along with canisters like Whipfred's Battle Song canister and the Polar Bear bin. This ability has some great benefits outside of cleaning the base too. Winbot will automatically collect materials when gathering, like reaping grass with a Shadow Reaper and put it inside of Chester. While you are farming giant crops with your Enlightened Catapults, Winbot will be putting the seeds in a fridge and the vegetables in a salt box, or even Winbot will simply be picking up seeds passively when birds drop them around the base and putting them in a fridge. I love Winbot. This is my favorite favorite thing on Winona's skill tree, second only to the Enlightened Catapults. At the end of the video, we're going to talk about a few farms that are made automatic by Winbot, so keep watching till then. Now, Winbot does have durability, and when his battery dies, he dies, and so does my heart, for letting him run out of life juice. Luckily, he counts as a gadget, so can be recharged at any generator. Luckily again, Winbot is a smart little boy, and when you place him down, he will always try to get back to the place that you placed him to when he is idle. This means you should simply place him within range of a generator, so that when he's idle, he will go into sleep mode and plug himself in to keep his durability topped off at that generator. The only times this doesn't work is if he gets stuck somehow, or if you unload the area while he isn't sitting idle at the generator. This can cause him to idle away from the generator, which means you have to pick him up and move him occasionally. Now, Winbot versus Wobot. If you didn't know, Winbot and Wobot at a glance do the same thing, which is they pick up and store items, but there are a few small differences which I think makes Winbot superior overall. Wobot's durability lasts longer than Winbot's, loses more durability when it is raining, loses speed as it loses durability, needs to be manually repaired with an auto-matogenic, and lastly, but absolutely not least, Wobot can wear hats, hell yeah. Winbot on the other hand has less durability than Wobot, but will always be recharged by generators automatically, so you'll never notice the durability loss, and Winbots are straight up just faster than Wobot, as Winbots move and work faster than Wobots. So I'd pick Winbots over Wobot. Winbots? Yes, you can have multiple Winbots. Using multiple, you can cover a larger area, and the Winbots are smart together. For example, if there's two pieces of grass on the floor, the Winbots won't target the same piece of grass, so they won't waste time chasing each other around. This also applies when a Wobot and Winbot are working together. I love Winbot, wow. That's all for Founders Keepers 1. Now on to Founders Keepers 2. Founders Keepers 2 requires Founders Keepers 1, and you cannot have Shadow Seeker 2 unlocked. This skill says, broaden the scope of your inspectacles to locate higher grade supply caches, gain mastery over all technology found in advanced cache boxes. What this does is it grants you a 25% chance of finding an advanced cache box rather than a normal cache box from the previous skill while using your inspectacles. These advanced cache boxes might also require you to do a puzzle. Once you open them, they contain scrap, electrical doodads, gizmos, and guaranteed 1 of 2 unstable transmissions for a recipe that you do not currently have unlocked. Note that this advanced cache box does not drop the calibrated perceiver, which is the scanning tool. Once you get 1 of the 2 unstable transmissions, you can use a calibrated perceiver to scan it to unlock its corresponding recipe. One unstable transmission unlocks the Portasol, and the other unlocks the Teletransport station. Both of these items require the gizmos you get from advanced cache boxes to craft. These gizmos act similar to the scanner and doohickeys, as in they can only be held in Winona's inventory, and if you drop them and leave them on the floor for too long, they will despawn. The Portasol requires 4 Winona tape, 4 electrical doodads, 4 twigs, and 1 gizmo to craft, and the Teletransport station requires 6 tapes, 6 electrical doodads, 3 boards, and 1 gizmo to craft. These 2 items will be used in conjunction with each other to make teleport stations wherever you want. When you equip a Portasol, you can right-click it to begin teleporting. Aside from the huge amount of invulnerability frames you get during the teleport animation, and that the Portasol drains 6.667% durability, it will then find the closest Teletransport station to you that you're not already standing on and teleport you and all the items on the floor close to you within a 2 wall unit radius to your destination. If there is no valid Teletransport station available, then the Portasol's teleport won't change your location at all, but you still get the invulnerability frames. For a Teletransport station to be a valid destination, it needs to be powered by a generator. If it isn't being powered, then you cannot teleport to it, and the next closest one to you will be selected. The items the Portasol will teleport are anything which has an inventory item version. This includes spiders, rabbits caught in a trap, suspicious marble pieces, lunar altar pieces, and everything else that has an inventory icon. This teleport works both in the overworld and the caves, but you can't teleport from the caves to the overworld and vice versa. The Portasol counts as a gadget, so can be recharged by dropping it near a generator. It takes 8 minutes for a Portasol to recharge fully from 0% without the quick recharge skill. I'd recommend you deploy the handy remote tactic here too, in that you should have 2 Portasols, one always charging and one always on you. Then swap them out when the one you're using drops to less than 36% durability. Why 36%? So you can teleport multiple times, of course. Why am I teleporting multiple times? Don't worry, I'll explain soon. Using these items, you can create a teleportation network all over the map. Or can you? Since the Portasol will always take you to the closest telestation while ignoring the one you're standing on, you can actually only teleport between 2 telestations without moving. You can increase this to 3 telestations if on the central telestation, you move slightly toward the station that you want to go to while standing on the central telestation. This way you're slightly closer to one than the other. This assumes all 3 stations have the exact same distance between its neighbor, which you would have to measure. Using this method of moving slightly closer to the telestation you want to teleport to, you can can create a theoretical network of unlimited telestations all over the map, but the problem is, they all have to be the exact same distance away from their neighbours. If there's one closer than the rest, then you will always go to the closest one and then to the next closest one. So you can't pick and choose which telestation you end up at unless they are all exactly the same distance away from each other, like I said. There are a few workarounds for this, but they basically all boil down to you must measure the distance between each telestation to be precise. I am not at all a fan of this, as it's a ton of effort and very restrictive in where you can put your telestations. But I am a fan of this next workaround that is brought to you by Mr. Mither. This setup requires you to have one Enlightened Shard powering each telestation pad's g.e.merator. This way, when you teleport, the telestation you land at will burn out the shard inside the generator, which deactivates that generator and therefore disables the telestation for 10 seconds. Repeating this over and over means you can burn out 3 generators and teleport away again, landing at your 4th destination before the first generator recovers from being burnt out, meaning you don't need to place them precisely at all. Simply keep teleporting until you land at the destination you want. Though the g.e.merators drain more power depending on how far you teleport. So if you don't teleport far enough, then the shard won't burn out, since not enough power got drained at once. This means the telestation needs to be at least 36.25 tiles away from each other to cause these shards to burn out. If you have the generator efficiency skill level 3 unlocked, which you probably will, then the teleports need to be a distance of more than 90.75 tiles away. Otherwise the shards won't burn out. This setup limits you to 4 total destinations in the overworld and 4 destinations in the caves to work consistently without any measuring or thinking, while also not limiting your telestation placements. They can be as far as you want as long as they meet the minimum distance rule we talked about just a second ago. So I think this setup is pretty good. Quick note that you can potentially use 5 telestations without issue, but it depends on your lag and the loading times between teleporting, but we'll dive more into using more than 4 telestations in a network in a minute. If you pick Founders Keepers 2 in the early game, I'd recommend this next setup before you get any shards. Have a telestation at your base and a Portasol in your inventory, and a pocket generator and telestation in your inventory. And that's it. That way, no matter where you are in the overworld, you can teleport back to your base. You can do the same thing for the caves, except have your telestation located at the staircase that takes you back to your overworld base. Your pocket generator and telestation can be used if you need to go back to your base, but you want to return to where you're teleporting from. For example, if you're doing Pearl's tasks, you can leave a telestation on her island, so you can easily teleport between her island and your base. Or perhaps you're moving the Spacious marble pieces or lunar altar pieces, leave one telestation where the pieces need to go, and take your base telestation to the pieces, then leave them on the floor and teleport them to their destination. Now it's time for some way too dank telestation manipulation mechanic explanations. If you can comprehend and understand my ramblings, then you can use more than 4 telestations at once without having to measure distances exactly. But it does require you to think a little bit, so let's go. You can burn out 3 telestations before the 4th telestation comes back online. Cool. Now what if we had a network of 5, 6, 7 or even more telestations? Can we navigate around it? Yes, but it requires some brain juice to flow. Here's the golden rule you must follow to make any sized telestation network operate most of the time. The distance between the furthest telestation and its neighboring telestation must be less than the distance between that neighboring telestation and its 3rd closest neighbor, excluding the furthest telestation. Try to wrap your head around that while I show it in practice. So let's say you have 8 telestations around the world. I'll number them 1 through 8. All of these telestations are at least 90.75 tiles away from each other, so that the g.e.merator's shards get burnt out when you teleport to them. But otherwise the distances between the telestations are not the same. If you wanted to get to this 8th telestation, which has a much bigger distance between it and its neighbor, the 7th telestation, compared to the distance between each of the other telestations, you must teleport from number 7. But that's not enough, as that number 7 will simply teleport you back to its closest neighbor, number 6. So to get to number 8, we must burn out the generators leading up to number 7. Those generators needing to be burnt out are 6 and 5. This will disable them leading up to 7. So upon landing at 7, 7, 6 and 5 will be burnt out, meaning number 4 has just stopped being burnt out. So upon teleporting from number 7, it will check the distances to the nearest valid telestation. It can't go to the previous 6 or 5 since they're burnt out, so the next 2 to check are number 8 and number 4. As long as the distance between number 7 and number 4 is greater than the distance between number 7 and number 8, then you will get teleported to number 8. I hope that makes sense. You might think, but what if teleporting from station number 4 to burn out station number 5 doesn't work, since station number 3 is closer to number 4 than it is to number 5? Then you just apply the same method. You start at number 1, burn out number 2, then 3, then 4, etc, etc, and then since you burn out number 3 and 4, 4's only choice is to take you to number 5 and so on. This is how you manipulate burning out generators to control where you go. Burning out generators effectively creates new closest neighbors for your next telestation to direct you to, making your network more flexible. If you burn generators out in different orders, you'll be teleported to different places in different orders. There isn't really a consistent way to calculate this without just measuring distances, but we're trying to avoid that, so simply just put your telestations wherever you want and then experiment, making sure they're at least 90.75 tiles away so that the shards burn out when you land at the telestation. Then after that, you'll be able to see which telestations to start from and in which order you must burn out the telestations to get to a specific telestation. With a high success rate, you can just eyeball the distances on the map and figure out if burning out the 3 generators will allow you access to your entire network. If you have a tangled mess with more than like 5 telestations in a weird shape that isn't a circle, square, or diamond, it will be a lot harder to figure out if it will work, and you may end up with dead telestations which you can never access without walking close to them. Anyway, I mentioned this complicated workaround as I really don't like the idea of restricting yourself by measuring the exact distances between each telestation. Thanks for listening to my mad ramblings, and thanks to Mytha and Astronaut for helping me test this madness. Overall, this is a pretty good skill, I think. It won't take you more than a few days to unlock the Teleportation and Portasol, and you get a huge amount of scrap and electrical doodads over time from the cash boxes, making the Warber's armor quite easy to get and repair once you kill Celestial Champion and get the blueprints. But ultimately, you're choosing between teleporting to any wormhole or tentapillar you want from any other wormhole or tentapillar using Shadowseeker 2 and Charlie's glasses, or you're choosing to have to build your own pretty expensive teleportation network, which won't be super expansive nor fully ready until Celestial Champion has died at least once, more likely twice, and even then you can only really have 4 destinations on each map without making the teleportation network more complex by measuring exact distances between telestations or experimenting with burning out telestations. I used to be highly biased towards Charlie's wormhole manipulation rather than Wagstaff's teleports, but Wagstaff's teleports have grown on me. I still do think Charlie's wormholes are much better in the early game, but as soon as you have 4 shards to spare, I think the telestations would grant much more flexibility, and you'll probably prefer the telestations in the early game if you're rushing a Celestial Champion, since you can, like we said earlier, teleport to Lunar Island and Pearl Island using the telestations, expediting the Celestial Champion rush. Now let's talk about the recommended skill trees. For this recommendation, we'll have 2 recommended skill trees, one for the early game and one for after you've killed Celestial Champion. Starting with the early game skill tree, we want to maximize the utility from the skill tree without using Celestial Champion shards. We're going to start with Portability, as you need this skill to unlock more of the skill tree, and it's a great skill, then followed by Spacious Spotlight and Hotlight, while ignoring Quick Charge and Energy Saver. Quick Charge is very skippable as it doesn't do anything extra, and Energy Saver sounds good on paper, but in practice it will just potentially save you a tiny amount of fuel, so that's why I've skipped it. Moving on to the second shelf, we're going to unlock Precise Targeting to maximize your Catapult's DPS, and unlocking Greater Generator 1, 2, and 3. We've unlocked the third shelf now, so let's unlock Nightmare Generator for the increase in generator capacity, and to avoid having to mine nitrate to fuel generators. Then I'll opt to unlock Shadowseeker 1 and 2 for the amazing exploration and navigation control the skill provides with the glasses and precise wormhole jumping. Now let's unlock Founders Keepers 1 to unlock Winbot, because we love Winbot. You could go for Founders Keepers 2 instead of Shadowseeker 2 if you really like the telestations, but that's up to you. Then to maximize our options, we'll get Pure Horror Generator and Shadow Strike. You may not use these, but having the option is fine, because without Celestial Champion you can't utilize the Lunar Catapult skills yet anyway, whereas in the early game you can examine ruin stuff for Pure Horror and kill Nightmare Werepig for early Pure Horror 2. And the rest is up to your personal preference. If you think you won't always be able to spam Precise Targeting, then unlock Barrage for a cheap auto-fire attack rate increase. Then with your remaining skill point, grab Explosive Volley I. If you won't be using Horror Generator nor Shadow Strike, then I'd recommend just not picking them and instead going for Explosive Volley 2 and 3. This is a diverse skill tree that maximizes your options without having to kill Celestial Champion. Good luck, beginners. Next is the skill tree you'd switch into after you've killed Celestial Champion at least once. So Lunar Rifts are active and you have 5 or more shards at your disposal. We're starting the same, unlocking Portability, Spacious Spotlight, and Hotlight. Then on the second shelf, unlocking Greater Generator 3, followed by the 3 Lunar Catapult skills, including Enlightened Strike on the third shelf. Then we're going to go for Founders Keepers 1 because we love Winbot, and Founders Keepers 2 because teleporting over precise locations around the world and caves is cool. Though if you're not going to be playing your world for the long term, then the effort to set up 4 telestations with a shard in each of them on the surface and 4 more in the caves won't really be worth it, in which case use Shadowseeker 1 and 2 instead. Then we're going to grab Precise Targeting in case we don't want the destruction effect of Enlightened Strike, like if you're killing Deadly Bright Shades on your growing farming crops. Then with your 3 remaining points, we'll max out Explosive Volley to maximize our Catapult's area of effect. This is the skill tree I'd pick once Celestial Champion has been defeated, and I'll be playing for another year or 2 in the world. There is an argument to unlock Founders Keepers 2 straight away before Celestial Champion. That way, as you explore the caves and overworld, you can set up telepads as you go to teleport back there, which will work perfectly well if you're using 2 telestations on each, the overworld and the caves. Good luck with your illuminated catapults, gamers. Now it is time for the updated Varg farm to include all the skill tree changes and the building changes that were implemented recently. If you haven't seen my dedicated Varg farm video, then don't worry, because in this section I'm going to skip a ton of mechanics explanation and just show you the finished product, how it works and how to operate it. This farm is a lot more automated and faster now. With being able to use shards as catapult fuel, now there's not a lot of worth in farming gems from this farm anymore, unless you're farming them for a Wilson to transmute them into Grune gems or something. Also, the new trees in the late game also farm gems, but a Varg farm is still quite necessary if you want to farm Hound's Teeth to fuel your Howlitzer, a great endgame range weapon. So here's the new and improved Varg farm using 16 Varg still. With the addition of walls and gates being immune to catapults, I replaced all the statues with walls. The walls are placed 3 wall units away from the catapults around the square of catapults, which is where the statues used to go, and we slipped 4 gates into the setup. Aside from that, Mr. Myther gave me the idea of adding 2 choke points using table furniture to concentrate the hounds into 2 areas for 2 reasons. Firstly, to maximize the AoE of the catapults, and 2, because we're going to be using wind bots. The wind bots are placed so that their search area ends at the walls, otherwise they would run against the walls trying to get into the safe zone to grab drops. Then close to the wall is a chest with an elastic spacer on it to give it 4 billion item storage with a monster meat, hound's teeth, and a blue gem inside of it, so the wind bots place the items they find in the chest automatically. For these examples, I used 4 wind bots for each side, and they did a fine job and only needed to clean up for another minute or so after the farm stopped running for 10 minutes. So you could use 5 wind bots per side or more if you wanted. I initially ran 4 setups. First was 8 catapults with no skills enabled, second was 8 catapults with explosive volley 3 enabled, third was 8 catapults with explosive volley 3 and barrage enabled, and fourth was only 2 catapults but manual casting Enlightened Strike. When using the first 3 auto-firing methods, you must tag the hounds to keep the catapults attacking, and for barrage I cast it every 20 seconds. All the tests I used 2 choke points and did during winter, which if I wanted to fluff the numbers isn't the best season to do it, but whatever. Here's the results I recorded. With 8 catapults, my average hound kills per minute was 156. With explosive volley 3 it was 187. With explosive volley 3 and barrage it was 200. And with 2 catapults using Enlightened Strike, it was almost 230 hounds per minute. So the biggest difference here is the AoE increase from explosive volley and the one-shot killing from Enlightened Strike. Since special hounds have 100 health and normal hounds 150 health, 240 damage from 2 Enlightened Strikes will always one-shot any hound. As such, there's never any wasted time because you simply shoot where the hounds are, which is usually next to your 2 choke points, and they will instantly die. Also, while I was using Enlightened Strike, I rotated between 2 remotes. When one hit 0% durability, I dropped it so the G.E.M.erator charged it, then I used the other one. I was then reminded to test Shadow Strike, so I planted 6 patches of rose vines around the choke points, then I just sat back and watched as the vines killed all the hounds when they tried to get through the choke points, and it was surprisingly effective. During winter against ice hounds, it was a little worse than using 8 catapults with explosive volley 3 and barrage, but it was more effective during autumn since there's no ice hounds, causing the normal hounds to freeze, meaning the vines couldn't damage them. In autumn with the same setup, it killed 219 hounds per minute, only 10 hounds less per minute than Enlightened Strike. So it kills 5% less hounds per minute than Enlightened Strike with 2 catapults, but using Shadow Strike is no effort, only refreshing the 6 rose patches every 5 minutes when they expire. Neat. Also, this of course costs 1 pure horror every 20 minutes to run the farm this way, which costs, more than nothing, which is what it costs when using Enlightened Strads. Nothing. So Enlightened Strike is the best and has improved the farm such that you kill about 46% more hounds compared to without any skills, and I think that's basically the limit, as most of the time I was waiting for the 16 Vargs to spawn more hounds because I had killed them all already. But that's not the only metric to measure. In my old Varg farm design video, the amount of monster meat you would recover is about 10%. So if you killed 1000 hounds, you'd only get 100 monster meat due to most of it landing outside the safe zone and hounds eating it. Now with windbots auto-collecting monster meat, you recover about 40% of the monster meat dropped by the hounds. Very cool. A lot of building changes have happened, so building the old Varg farm in the method I showed in that video doesn't work anymore, but that doesn't matter because you can just use walls directly where you would have put the statues. And you can dismantle and place catapults even after the walls have been put up, so you can switch between an 8 catapult and 2 catapult setup. Let's quickly tour the whole farm to see how everything is built in case you want to copy it. You don't need an emergency escape wormhole anymore because you can use the Portasol and a telestation to get out of there quickly if a hound wave happens or a giant is about to spawn. And if a hound wave does happen, the wild hounds could influence the Varg hounds to bite some walls, so prepare to repair the walls only when a hound wave happens, or oddly when you hit a Varg with a catapult, sometimes the Varg hound bites the walls. This isn't a big deal though. If you want to turn off your farm, you can now just dismantle the G.E.M.erator to stop the catapults. Do this too in the case that the catapults are targeting hounds that are too close to the Varg Vargs, but that shouldn't happen as the hounds should at all times be either baited to bait pens or baited to the catapult safe zone to be killed. I've added spotlights on each end of the farm to keep you warm in winter, connected to a g.e.merator with 1 shard in it. Connected to these g.e.merators too are 4 windbots on each side. All the windbots search ranges end at the safe zone walls so they don't try to walk through the walls and get stuck, which does mean the small amount of loot that ends up inside the safe zone you do need to pick up eventually yourself. There's 2 flinger mags for when you're fighting firehounds, which covers the entire flammable parts of the farm. Then we have 2 chests on each side of the choke points which have been affected by an elastic spacer for windbots to put loot inside of. The catapult safe zone is just made up of walls where the statues used to be, being 3 wall units away from the catapults, and each inner corner is filled in with 4 walls making an L shape to block the rare occurrence of a hound spawning in the corners of the safe zone. You can still place 8 catapults even with these walls in each corner using geometric placement to place the generator in the middle, then placing 4 of the catapults above, below, and at each side of the generator. Then you must turn off geometric placement to squeeze in the last 4 catapults next to the corner of the walls. Then knock out 2 walls on the top and bottom sides of the safe zone in the center of the line of walls and put a table in that gap. You'll also have to do this without geometric placement to place it tightly in there. There are 2 drying racks at the top of the farm to make monster jerky to bait hounds away from the safe zone when the farm isn't in use, and to bait them to the safe zone before activating the catapults. You do not want to activate the farm when the hounds are next to the Vargs and aren't baited. You do still need to build the Varg pens the same to manipulate the hounds' pathing so they approach the safe zones as efficiently and as consistently as possible. In my experience, there aren't enough hounds to push themselves through the individual table choke points, but it's technically possible. Otherwise, in my testing, I never experienced a hound getting into the catapult safe zone through either pushing or spawning. That's the farm, feel free to copy it. I'm not going to explain all the mechanics because it will take too long, as can be seen by my old Varg farm video. Next is kind of a dumb farm, but quite awesome to watch while it still works. It's the fully automatic butterfly farm. Nearby or in your base, set up a generator with a shard in it with a catapult attached to it. Plant a flower and place a wall next to the flower. Pick any other flowers close by that isn't the flower that you planted, then activate your catapult and attack the wall until your active catapult starts firing at it. Don't worry, the wall won't receive any damage from the catapult, but any butterfly that spawns close to the wall, which is the flower that you planted, will get hit by the catapult's air effect and die, dropping butterfly wings and a small chance at butter. Then of course have a windbot deployed on the generator that is powering the catapult with a fridge nearby with a butterfly wing and a butter in. Then when this farm is loaded, the butterflies will spawn and die to the catapult, and windbot will constantly pick up and store the wings and butter in the fridge. This farm is more productive the more players nearby, since the amount of butterflies that spawn scales proportionally with the amount of players that are nearby. This farm can be achieved very early game and is honestly decent and has little to no cost. In the early game you can't use a shard of course, so use a nitrate or nightmare generator instead. You can make a fully automated grass gecko farm with windbot. I'd recommend 3 layers of walls so the grass geckos don't push through them, and then 2 separate gates to get inside. Inside the container is a windbot, a generator, a chest for storing grass, and however many grass geckos you want. Windbot will continuously scare the grass geckos and pick up the grass and put it in the chest whenever they grow their tails back. Consider upgrading this chest or any chest used for storing mass amounts of materials with the elastic spacer, which means you can store up to 4.2 billion of an item. While you're at it, you can make a bunch of different farms with different mobs and plants that auto drop resources into enclosures for windbot to gather said resources, including twiggy trees for twigs, koala fence for poop, and grass gators for more twigs. Let me know if you think of any other mob, plant, or resource that auto drops resources to put into this farm in the comments. And yeah, that's it. Thanks for watching. Okay, I'm leaving now to ask Walkwell to review my script. Me wow.
Red Magic Nova.
I'm glad you